I'm going to start with you, Bob, because a lot of people may not know, who you are or what you do. Could you tell us a bit about your background?
Sure. I spent 43 years working for one company, which is very unusual these days. I started with Douglas Aircraft Company as a summer job. And as my career was evolving in 1968, I was asked by my boss if I had any ideas about what he could tell the Air Force about how we'd get to orbit 10 years from now. And so for a joke, I said, well, why don't you tell them how the alleged UFOs do it? He said, that's a great idea. Why don't you work on that? So that was when I read my first UFO book. It was by Don Menzel. And I looked at it and I concluded that this guy is ignoring all the data. And then I read another 50 books. And a year later, I was standing in for my boss to report on how well we were doing on contracts. So our job was to get new contracts. And I said, well, we're doing fine. I gave him the regular report. And then afterwards, they said, well, Dr. Wood, we don't hear from you very often. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do that's interesting? And so in a moment, I decided to say, well, you're not going to believe this, but in fact, I've read 50 UFO books. And the only thing that's unclear to me, since it's clear to me that they are manned by extraterrestrials, the only thing that's unclear is to whether or not we figure out how they work before or after Lockheed. Lockheed was our competitor at the time. And there was a long moment of silence, and my immediate boss, who was the vice president, my boss's boss, said, what would you think it would take to look into that? And so the net result of that conversation is over the next year and a half, we spent $500,000 of company money trying to look into how UFOs worked. We hired a detective to interview alleged witnesses. We hired a physicists to create new theories. We set up a little laboratory to spin magnets, and we bought a van to go to the top of mountains and record whatever we could see. And after a year and a half, we knew one thing, and that was how fast we were spending the money. We had no idea how close we were getting to the answer, so we canceled the project. And at that time, I got reassigned to come to live in Newport Beach, actually, and work on the ballistic missile defense program. So for the next 8 years, I became a BMD radar guy. And then for the years after that, I worked on improving our independent research and development scores, which was very helpful dollar-wise. And I wound up working on the International Space Station at the end of my career. So I had a fun career working on missiles and winding up in space. Was involved at the high level of management for most of the time I was the director. I never was willing to put in the 70 hours a week required to make it to VP. But when I retired in 1993, I was very happy. And then one of the guys that I had hired for this project was Stan Friedman, because he had a reputation of knowing about the literature.
Was this the UFO project that put you on? They
UFO
paid you to hunt UFOs.
Yeah, right. So when I retired in 1993, about a year later, I got a call from my former employee, Stan Friedman, and said, I've got a document that's a fax of something that looks kind of interesting. He says, technology, recovery and disposal. He says, a fax. Would you be interested in trying to authenticate it? And I said, sure. So I did that, and that's when I became involved in authenticating questioned leaked UFO documents that were classified. And this particular document turned out to be a winner because I went personally to the government printing office and showed it to a guy who was involved at that time. 1954 was the time of the document. And he looked at it and he said, well, based on the content, I'd say this is a hoax, because the title was Extraterrestrial Entities and Technology, Recovery and Disposal. They were telling about how we get started in this program, how you keep the public in the dark, how you lie to them to make sure they don't report UFOs. So anyway, it turned out to be authentic. The guy looked at it and he said, well, based on the content, I would say it's phony. But based on the fact that there's a raised Z and the type font is exactly the type font that was used in 1954, which I was responsible for, he said, I would say it clearly was printed by a government printing office in 1954, no question about it. So that established my credibility in the UFO community. And people started sending me more question documents to authenticate, many of which were top secret.
So you wound up in this position where you're now the guy
Yeah, I'm the
to
guy.
talk to about
Yeah,
authenticating these
yeah,
documents. And by
right.
the way, on that particular document, I remember finding that online and reading it, and I was like, what is this? What is this?
Yeah.
You know, and I had some interest in the UFOs, and I found it fascinating. And could it be true? Now here I am sitting with a man who authenticated this thing. Let me ask you, before you came across those documents, before you read your first book, you're in college, did you have any interest or knowing of UFOs? And
I think I read one book by Gerald Hurd called Is Another World Watching? And his theory was that they must be insects because the accelerations would be sustainable only by insects that had their structural shell on the outside. And that's, as I recall, the only book I ever read until I read this first one by.
But it's playing our realm of knowledge of three-dimensional aerodynamics and nothing about inertial. Cancel.
Yeah, my degree was in aeronautical engineering, and then I had a PhD in physics at Cornell. Yeah. So that's why I got the job of being a radar expert, because they didn't have anybody who was a radar expert, and they figured anybody with a PhD in physics ought to be able to learn it. So that was how I got involved in radar.
I mean, even when you're out chasing these things, I mean, you said a camera, you're on the mountaintops with this van or what have you. Did you ever catch sight of anything while you were out there? Did you see anything?
No, we sent this van, I didn't go personally, but we sent this van to the top of a mountain where allegedly there had been many UFOs reported. And he was there for a week, and he took photographs of anything interesting, but there was nothing to see.
So it didn't really nothing you could put your face.
That was a good example of why we canceled the project. You know, we spent all this money to instrument this van and got nothing.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating.
So then after I established kind of a mini reputation in the UFO field, I got a call from a guy by the name of Joe Firmage. He says, I'm a .com executive. He said, I understand you've got question documents about UFOs. And I said, yes. He said, well, I'd like to borrow them and authenticate them. And so I said, well, and then he said, what do you think they're worth? I said, I don't know, they might be worth millions. So after that, then I called up Hal Puthoff, who was my friend, and said, this guy claims that he knows you. And he said, oh yeah, Joe Firmage, he's a good guy. And so I called Joe back and said, yeah, okay. He said, well, I got a yacht in Newport Beach, and you live there. How about coming down this Sunday and showing me the documents? So I said, okay. So I found his boat, showed him all the documents. And my first wife had been pretty skeptical about my wasting my time on UFOs after I retired. So I had a little skeptical attitude when I visited with Joe. But Joe looked at him, he said, these are exactly what I want. And he said, what I'd like to do is I'd like to offer you the opportunity, if I authenticate these, then I will print 2,000 copies of the documents, and you can have those and sell them. And so I said, well, Joe, is that all? Did you have any other cash involved? Oh, he said, I forgot. And he opened his briefcase and he took out a check already made out to me for $500,000.
Wow. So, you know, the UFOs are clearly a complete waste of time for you.
That's right.
And you shouldn't focus any more time on that.
That's right. So I came home from that meeting, and my wife said, well, how'd the meeting go with Joe? And I said, well, pretty good. She looked at the check and said, how do you know it's any good? So,
of course. Well, that's what women do. You know, they look at men sideways. That's their role in life.
Right. So anyway, it turned out it was written on the same bank I banked with, so I went to my bank the next morning, and they said, can you tell me about this account? And 2 minutes later, they said, the money's all in the account. So I called up Joe and said, Joe, we'd like to accept your deal. This was actually a joint with my son, who was involved a little bit.
Now, was it just the one document we talked about a moment ago with the crash recovery?
No. It was a whole pile of documents. It was that plus a number of others, probably 30 or so documents. So anyway, the check was good. We cashed it, and Joe did exactly what he promised to do. He had his company print 2,000 copies of these documents, and we were getting such interest that he said he wanted to make a video of the truth. He said, you know, I'll give you $300,000 to do that. Actually, it was $250,000. So my son and I went to Hollywood and found out there were 5 different ways to get screwed in Hollywood. We found them all.
I'm sure there's more than 5. Yeah, there's more than 5.
But anyway, we did create this video called The Truth, Evidence That We Are Not Alone. And everybody was happy with that. And then Joe went on to other things. And by then, my son and I were clearly involved in the process of studying the subject.
I want to, if you wouldn't mind, could you tell us a little bit about MJ12 and those documents and how you came into that whole scenario? Because I know the website out there that you and your son have just a ton of information out there.
Well, yeah, the website is majesticdocuments.com, and that's where my son actually set up that website. And in that website, we put in a high-quality scanned copy of every document that we have. Actually, most of whom, all of which are in the other room, just a few feet away from where we are. Each document has a story to tell of its own, and then there's an authentication issue associated with each one, varying from really rock solid occasionally, where it's a copy of something that was supposed to go to the MJ12 of the CIA, and, to documents that seem to be the right kind of words at the right time, written by the right guy, but you can't prove that they're actually were, in fact, top secret documents.
So I get the impression that maybe there's, I haven't really dug too deep in all honesty. I'm not super familiar with MJ12, a little inkling about that. So for our viewers who don't know.
Well, I think a good example of an MJ12 document would be one that was written during the very early part of the war, actually just before the war, because at the so-called Battle of LA, which is like February 25th, 1942, after we shot down after we used 1,430 rounds of ammunition to try to shoot down one or more craft, then there was some information that Bill Tompkins got, but also there were some documents that were written one by Marshall, who was the head of the Army, and to FDR, and one from FDR back that basically said, one of the documents said that we had recovered 2 craft. One was shot down in the San Bernardino Mountains, and the other was salvaged by the Navy at sea.
So thank you for that, because I know I've talked to Bill a bit, and we've discussed this in our conversations, but other than what Bill has said, I was unaware that there was actual documentation that indicates that actually happened.
That's the earliest top secret documents that I've seen, and then it begins a string of classified documents throughout. One of the things that Bill told me recently that surprised me a little bit is that the documents that he was dealing with, even though they were clearly super top secret, were not stamped at all. And the Navy seemed to feel that was better protection if you just control physically.
Bill, was it an issue of better protection, or was it just they hadn't maybe advanced their compartmentalization of security to that point?
Actually, like Bob says, it was so classified, the best thing to do is not classify it at all and keep it in your own facilities. And the admiral that was handling that, Admiral Riccobotta, 4-star, that was his approach. He just said, we're not going to put any document out of this facility that's even confidential. So every trip that we made, we didn't handle any security documents. Unbelievable.
So all these documents you're digging up that you're now authenticating, be they MJ12 or other governmental documents that are kind of pointing some kind of evidence, be it circumstantial or otherwise, they're not marked. They don't really kind of give the blessing that this thing ever existed within a security structure.
Well, the documents I'm talking about, MJ12 documents, were all marked.
Oh, those were marked.
Oh, yeah, they were marked top secret. And in some cases, only secret, but mostly the ones that were really important were the ones that were marked top secret. The people who challenge, the skeptics sometimes who challenge the authenticity.
Yeah, let's talk about them. I mean, what kinds of things are they saying?
Well, one thing they say is that the first place, they don't follow the procedures for classifying documents. And then they go into detailing, this is what the procedure says, and this document doesn't follow that procedure. And so they're unwilling to accept that the security person in charge of a program can do whatever he cares, no matter what the official rules say. And that idea has just never seeped through into their minds. So that's the first challenge, is they don't follow the procedures. And then, of course, the skeptics go on to say, well, how would you ever keep this secret? And that's still an extremely valid question. I mean, as I've talked more and more to Bill and learned more about what really went on that we didn't learn about, I mean, basically, if you can convince somebody that the Germans got to the far side of the moon before the war ended, then you can convince them of anything. But it's very hard to make that first step. But that's where it is. I think we really need to establish the fact that there's a process in place that actually controls what the public can learn in multiple levels of great sophistication, and that's been going on since the Manhattan Project. It started with compartmentalization.
Yeah. So for you, it's a chase, really. I mean, I can see the passion you have with this. I mean, you've got to be doing it for this long. I mean, there's a passion there, clearly. For you, based on all the research you've done, is MJ12 real?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They don't know everything that's going on, though. The MJ12 people, who were mostly associated with Air Force, thought that they were a separate entity and were really in charge of everything. But what they didn't know is that, in my judgment, the Navy took the ship that they got in 1942 and they started to reverse engineer it right away. They didn't wait for anybody but Forrestal to tell them to go ahead and do it. And so I don't know where they did it, but China Lake would have been a good place to start. So my guess is that craft got shipped to the Navy, and the Navy people did the best they could to try to figure out how they worked. Mm-hmm. I think it still took the Navy, a decade or so to get enough smarts to figure it out. Right. But I think the Navy was the first to get the essential ingredients of trying to replicate them. The interesting, ironic thing is when I was first offered the opportunity in 1968 to figure out how they work by my management, the thing that makes me really think twice now is that it had already been done when I'm in 1968. I'm sure that the Navy knew how they worked by then, and probably the Air Force too.
Interesting, but Douglas didn't.
No.
No. As close as Douglas was to the Navy, you'd think, hey.
Well, the first crash actually was a crash at Cape Girardeau when there was a minister who was asked to come up to bless some bodies. And that crash, the Army got parts and the FBI got parts. And then, of course, in the Battle of LA, the Army got more parts and the Navy got parts. The CIA, in the meantime, was lurking in the corners trying to get their hands on whatever they could, the counterintelligence people, the CIA, Angleton in particular. So that these multiple agencies all trying to keep control of the recovered parts, not knowing that their colleagues had other parts.
Well, I mean, but Bill, your book kind of touches on a little bit of that tug of war with parts and pieces.
Yes.
So this is just interesting to hear you talk about this, and we get to read about it in Bill's book as well.
So yeah, the remarks that I'm making right now are different from the ones I would have made 10 years ago before I met Bill.
Yeah, well, see, let's talk about that. So let's go there. Let's talk about, here's a man, PhD, Cornell, aeronautics engineer degree from Colorado, basically a rocket scientist, right? Cooling systems, I believe, on the rockets is what you said. 43 years at McDonnell Douglas, a stellar career. And you've got this gentleman who was pulled out of the 9th grade, thrown into the service. And and now here he is pitching this program that fixes everything for Debus and von Braun, and it becomes, our Apollo program. How did you two get together? How does a guy like you connect with a guy like this and then cross over? Tell us a little bit about this story, about the thought process you had to go to kind of, quote unquote, come on board with the reality of the ETs.
Well, let Bob say how we got together, because it's really one of his friends in the business that got me to go with Bob.
Well, my recollection of first talking to Bill was on the phone when I got a phone call from him. And he started telling me a little bit about his story. And so I wrote down a page's worth of notes. And I thought, well, this is kind of unbelievable.
Thank you for being honest.
But I had one of the jobs I was given back at Douglas Aircraft was to interview people from the outside world who had ideas. And I found that no matter how wild or weird they sounded, it was always good to listen to them, because one time out of 10, their idea would be based on some facts. So I had trained myself to never turn anybody else just because they had a wild idea. So I listened to everything that Bill had to say, took notes, and concluded he had some interesting things. And I think we concluded that we had to meet face to face.
Right.
And so, so you had this practice, having worked at Douglas and have done this before, so you're just practicing the same thing over the phone with Bill. What was this, a few years ago? When did you all meet?
2009.
2009.
It took a long time. He said, well, I've been writing a book. And it turned out he had been writing a book with, I think, at least 3 other kinds of editors who were unable to extract words that could be printed. And so I looked at what had been written so far and concluded that it needed a lot of work. And in terms of sequencing things, in terms of sometimes the grammar and stuff like that. Sure. But his story fundamentally intrigued me, and I think it was probably only after the first year or so I felt, well, this guy's, he's real, he's telling the truth, he's telling everything as best as he can remember it. And I wish I could remember as much as he can remember, that many years ago. But I never doubted for a moment, well, after we became acquainted, that what he was telling me was as best as he could remember what really happened. He didn't evaluate or embellish on anything. If he didn't know the answer, he said he didn't know. And so that made me feel comfortable that.
Not quite, because for the first 6 months, he didn't believe one word I was telling him.
Chime in anytime, Bill. Let's hear it.
Yeah.
So anyway, we started shaping the book up, and it took a long time until I got seriously interested in actually making this a real book. And I forget exactly what it was that triggered me, but in the last 2 years, was it 2014, I guess it was,
Yeah.
we really started to look at drafts. And then, because I had published a book called Alien Viruses using Richard Dolan and CreateSpace, which is Amazon's subsidiary, I was encouraged to think about how easy that would be just to publish it myself. So rather than trying to find somebody to do the publishing, I just learned enough about how to do it online myself. And I concluded all you needed to have was some JPEGs and a Word document that was correct. Push the button and
Off it goes.
they'll tell you what's wrong.
Yeah. Tell me about how you first learned about Bill at Douglas Aircraft.
Well, after Bill told me the story, of course, the first thing that was obvious was that he worked at the same place I worked at. And he worked in the same building I worked at and knew the same people I knew. And so and he had copies of the memos on our same format. So I thought, well, the one thing that I can absolutely attest is that his story of being at Douglas Aircraft is valid. And all the people who were on the copies of the memos were men I knew. Now, because I was an engineer who dealt with thermodynamics and radar later, typically, and Bill knows better than anybody, the engineers typically look down on the draftsmen. The engineers, basically create the design, and the draftsmen merely just put their pencils on the paper and do this trivial stuff. So that's the way engineers thought about draftsmen. So even had I wanted to find out more about what Bill was doing, he was working in ground support electronics, which I had nothing to do with. And furthermore, he was a draftsman, and I wouldn't have been inclined to go talk to a draftsman, ordinary draftsman, just putting pencils on the paper. So there was that schism between, you know, the people who thought they knew a lot, the people who allegedly were actually doing the real work. And it took me a good deal of experience in the company to realize that everybody was doing a very important job in order to make it all work. So when I learned that Bill had been there at the same time I'd been there, I started to ask myself the question of how come we never met? And I just concluded that it was just because I was working on something different from what he was working on. I mean, I was very familiar with our S4B program, which was a third stage for the Apollo program. And, but I was not assigned to do anything there. And I knew all the folks that he was working with, but I didn't know him.
So I'm going to go back to UFO for a second. You were chasing UFOs. We've established that and never got to see one. You're also involved with MUFON down here as well, right?
Yes.
What's your capacity at MUFON?
Well, I just finished, I think, 17 years as one of their board members, and I retired from that position.
Are you still active?
I'm still active, yes. Actually, I'm still involved in helping to plan next year's conference, which, it hasn't been publicly announced yet, is going to be.
Do we want to broadcast that now? Because this is going to go out.
I don't think so.
I want to ask you, and I asked you this the last time we visited, and I love this topic, because you've been involved with MUFON.
Yes.
And you've met people who have seen UFOs and who have had encounters with ET. Would you ever want to see a UFO?
No.
Why not?
Well, see one. I might be willing to see one if it's 100 feet away, but my observation is that the subsequent events that happen to people who get really closely involved is generally not good. There's probably exceptions, but I haven't ever personally seen one. I've never personally been threatened that I'm, quote, saying too much to the public. I've spoken with the Rotary Club, the Exchange Club I belong to, telling them what's really going on, and nobody seems to care. So,
yeah, it sounds about right. People are pretty busy with their lives, and
Yeah.
it's not anything that kind of affects them.
right. But I think with respect to actually becoming involved with interacting with an alien, I don't think that would necessarily be good for my life. I'm happy with my current wife and my current situation. Being involved in this as an editor, communicating what I think is a real word, is a lot of fun. So far, nobody's threatened me. And if they did, I might stop. Who knows?
Yeah. And I just find it interesting. It just seems like a little bit of a contrast. You know, you've got a guy who's helping Bill, writing the books, extraterrestrials, but just keep the UFOs and the ET away from me. So I think that's so funny. How about you, Bill? Have you ever seen a UFO, Bill? Do I need to ask that question?
Well, actually, I saw one on a photograph of my uncle. Actually, he was chief surgeon at Santa Monica Hospital, and spent a lot of time in Egypt studying the Egyptian culture and the hieroglyphics. So he and my aunt were both on camels over there, and a photographer took the picture of the two of them on the two different camels. And between the pyramids in the back was a UFO. That's really the closest that I got to seeing a UFO.
So not even in the backyard of was that your mom's house in Florida?
You may be referring to my cousin, my brother and I in the backyard in a small house in Hollywood. And my cousin digging the holes in the backyard. We were I guess I was 7 or 8, and brother was 2 years older, and my cousin was about the same age. So we were all brought up together. And so we're in the backyard. We didn't have any landscaping because everybody was pretty poor. And we would dig holes. And we were digging holes in the dirt in the back. We'd actually go down and pull the dirt out and go down deeper and pull the dirt out. And then these ports came over. And they were watching us there. And so the first thing you say, well, what's aboard? And so these were just really nice, small people that they wouldn't just appear, but they would come, they always came from around the side of the house, like from the street level, along the side of the house, and then they'd appear in the backyard. And they would be talking in some sort of language, and very friendly, watching us dig the holes, and then they dig some holes too. And finally, it got to a point where they were interfering with my cousin's hole, and so he had to sort of make them back off. And but we didn't go as enemies, and they would leave. So again, the question came out, who were the Borts? And I guess Bob doesn't know much about this part, but
That's true.
my cousin, John Handon, he got malaria in the Pacific during World War II, came back, got his doctor's in geology, went to work for a Shell Oil Company down in Houston, and had to leave California. And got married, went down there. And he continued his studies and finally got a doctor's in astrophysics. And he became a very prominent astronomer. And he was funded in a hole drilling program off of the East Coast down on a platform underneath the ocean where they drilled down the deepest hole for research at what the planet was made of underneath the ocean bottom. A lot of publicity about it. And so he became an advisor to TRW Systems, which I worked at quite a number of years after I had left 12 years at Douglas, where Bob was. And so he became a consultant to us. And it was interesting that his Borts continued to be involved in his drilling of the deepest holes on the planet.
Is this the first you're hearing about this?
Yes.
And so John got funded. He became Dean of Texas A&M, and got considerable money to study extraterrestrials. And of course, his interpretation of the Borts were that they were extraterrestrial children. That's in the backyard of a small house in Hollywood. So
You know, if I'm an ET child, where am I going to hang out? You know, there's a backyard in Hollywood. Let's go there.
Yeah.
Let's go dig some holes.
So John actually got involved in extraterrestrial, obviously from the Borts, and he was involved in studying the relationship between extraterrestrial Borts or other extraterrestrials in different parts of the galaxy. And he did many studies reviewing what extraterrestrials, who they were, what they were involved in, why they would possibly be here, were they actually here? And here he is, an astrophysicist. His job is studying dirt, structure of the planets, comes up with all kinds of philosophies about different extraterrestrials from different planets in the solar system.
Is this written up somewhere, Bill?
Yes, he's very well written.
You got something to read, don't you?
Well, no, I'm just saying that that's just a part that Bob and I hadn't gotten into much. But it was fun with them bouncing around in that backyard.
Like with parents around, adults see them? I mean, was it just you kids back there? I mean, what?
People didn't see them. Other people didn't see them. The
Oh, they were there, but they didn't see them?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the question. Good question, Bob. So there were adults there, but they couldn't see the ports,
Yeah.
but you could.
And so obviously there was some sort of a connection there. Now, I have to go back from that to Uncle Harding's hobby, because like we said, he was chief surgeon at the Santa Monica Hospital, was making extremely good money, had a beautiful, large home 4 blocks from the beach in Santa Monica. And when my dad was out of a job, we stayed with them for 2 years. And he and his wife and the 3 daughters were taking continued trips to Egypt, storming over and inside of the pyramids and making arrangements to bring back all types of Egyptian artifacts. Now, Uncle Harding was convinced that the Egyptians were related to extraterrestrials, and he was convinced that extraterrestrials existed out in the galaxy and were somehow being involved in what's taking place on this planet. So his work was studying everything that he could find, looking at all aspects of the Egyptian civilization here on this planet, and what were all the artifacts. We brought them back. He had thousands of photographs he took over in Egypt. Brought them back, set up studies, different people on all different subjects. And he sort of narrated, sometimes participated as a senior member of the groups, sort of an advisor to different studies. Obviously heavy in astronomy.
This is over at TRW?
No, he did this mostly independent with his work in Texas, in Houston. And however, he was an advisor to Caltech. He was also an advisor to TRW systems, and became a principal in the program. What the Borts had to do with it, anybody's guess.
The principal in what program are we talking about, Bill?
Primarily in communications and in interpretations of the language, interpretations of the hieroglyphics, and because I have to say, I was at Douglas when Bob was there for 12 years, but we never worked together there. But we worked on many of the same programs, same missile programs, and just doing different things. And so at Douglas, I sort of got involved in a different manner than Bob had on extraterrestrials. And so I was addressing some of the things that I had been involved in the Navy, which were heavily involved in the Germans being supported by reptilian extraterrestrials before World War II and during World War II. And this is a whole different story, a whole different box.
Right, and we can go there in a bit. I want to go back, just try to summarize some of what you said, because I'm a little bit lost on Dr. Harding, his work with the Egyptians. What is the communications? How does that tie into aerospace, UFOs extra? Is it supposed to, or is this just a sign?
Well,
I mean,
yeah, remember he's a geologist, a geophysicist, and one of the areas which TRW was studying, Redondo Beach, was the geology of the planet as being maybe not the best thing that we would like it to be. So both,
you're talking about stability.
we're talking about the actual structure of the planet from a astronomer standpoint, structure of the planet from a structures standpoint, where both of the two areas, TRW and my cousin's work, were studying this planet. They were studying the other planets and the moons in the solar system. They were studying the distances. They were coming up with different reasons for strange things happening in the the planets around the solar system. Strange things were being happening with possible extraterrestrials. So one of the studies at TRW was to take a look at the planet itself from, say, thousands of years ago. And way back, of course, they found that there was only one continent on the planet, and it was on one side of the planet. So they made the assumptions that the planet was trying to fix itself because over several weeks, these single continents moved out into separate continents. The American continent, European continent, this sort of thing.
Are you following, Bob?
Yeah, I think it was several years, but not.
That's the way Bill talks, yeah. So weeks is years, decades, whatever. So it's all good. Time has gone by.
Yeah, but this effort is very interesting.
Well, yeah,
because-
I'm trying to tie it all into like the Egyptian communication thing. I mean, we're like, we're out in the stars, we're back here, it's structures.
Well, if I could inject for a second, one of the perspectives that I think the person would need to understand what Bill is saying is that his time at TRW, which was like 68 to 71, somewhere in there, that TRW's scope of activities and involvement was huge. There's anything that was an unanswered question in the world is something that they would look at.
Right.
And so they'd set a team of people on it that would be unique to themselves. They wouldn't talk to other people. It would be compartmentalized. It was a classic example of compartmentalization. So they would study it down as deep as they needed to and get the answer. They would, for example, some of the kinds of questions they were trying to answer is, well, who really built the pyramids? You know, and
Well, is that what Dr. Harding was doing then? Was he part of the TRW research into the pyramids and all these artifacts? Because we went from borts to the pyramids to structures to TRW. So I'm just trying to connect the dots and understand how Dr.
Well, that was just one example, but I was trying to say, there's a dozen different subjects that TRW was studying. Like, could you invent some other way to get engine for cars other than gasoline? And that's one of the examples, the Joe Papp engine that Bill was actually in charge of, that was canceled by the people from Detroit. Mm-hmm. And then how did they actually build these underground tunnels? Issues like that. What was the story on Muslims? Is there? I'm not quite sure what question they were trying to answer, but but there was but they had a dozen or so studies of this sort, each one of which at the end of it would be something that was extremely exciting to mankind as a whole if they knew the answers.
Mm-hmm. And literally, they had unlimited funds. This was very, very unusual. It was really the first major think tank type of an organization that just had nothing but money to study literally every subject, like Bob is saying. Mm-hmm. So there was hundreds of laboratories, hundreds of sub-laboratories. And like Bob said, they were compartments. They didn't know what was going on in the other labs.
Remote viewing would be a good example.
Okay, there you go.
Very heavy in remote viewing. And so the point was that here is this astrogeophysicist cousin of mine who then becomes an advisor to the people at TRW that are studying galaxies. They're studying not just stars and planets, they're studying different galaxies. And then they're come to the conclusion that there's more than one galaxy. And within less than 3 years, they figured out when I was there that there may have been 1,000 galaxies. And again, today, we know that the new number is 2 trillion galaxies out there.
Sure.
So, but these fellows were just scratching the surface on all this front end type of programs, not even having an agenda or a requirement to come up with something. They were simply studying it, these top level people. And here, my cousin would give a briefing on his thoughts of what the structure of the planet was, why it was a poor place to be, because whoever it was during one of the wars a number of weeks ago between different extraterrestrials and caused one of the fifth planets to be blown up in the solar system and left all these rocks spinning around the sun, which we have to
You know, a lot of
navigate.
people out there don't even know we have an asteroid belt. They have just clueless. They have no idea we have that. So what Bill's referring to is that, you know, the asteroid belt that's in our solar system, it used to be a planet and got blasted in a extraterrestrial war.
Yeah, and so they're addressing all of these different subjects, and they're addressing the fact that the continent, the American plate continent, is climbing up on top of the Pacific plate. I'm sorry, the Pacific is climbing on top of the American plate, and it's going to push it down into the magma again. It did this before, several weeks back. It even did it before Noah had his flood, okay? And yes, there was more floods more recently than just the one that everybody knows about that Noah was involved in. And then we find that, gee whiz, there were 4 more between Noah's and us, our time-wise. So they were studying virtually everything that was going on in this TRW Space Systems secret tank facility. And they had beautiful facilities there. Unbelievable. My office was on the 2nd floor of an all-glass building, opened out with a big piece of glass that went from the floor to the ceiling, all futuristic furniture, everything space-like.
They had money.
Money, and it's a fun place to work.
And a fun place
Okay?
to work, yeah.
Fun place to work. But way before that, I have to get back into Bob's part, where, for whatever reason, back when I was a kid, 9 years old, I built some models of what I thought would be spaceships. I was very interested in that. And my dad had taken us up, my brother and I, up to Mount Wilson, and we got chances to look through the telescope and talk to the astronomers. And I came up with something about, which I shouldn't have said, at one of those briefings, which was, which of the stars has the planets where the people are living? And so you don't say that in front of astronomers, because astronomers did not believe that there was any other living organizations out in the
Put a little life in this party.
This is really good. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, welcome back. We're gonna shift gears a little bit here, and you know, I want to talk about Neil Armstrong setting foot on the moon and what I saw on TV. Remember when I was a kid, and we were so excited about this. My dad and I, we had the Saturn V rocket model. We built that thing, and as the rocket's going up, we're taking the stages off. We're at this stage, we're at that stage, you know. So it was kind of an interactive thing for me as a child growing up, being able to watch this landing on TV. And I remember watching it. I'm just going, "Wow, man, that's really amazing." And I had some questions about it, though. I was seeing some things that wasn't really completely clicking with me, even as a child. I went, something just didn't feel right. So we saw Neil Armstrong, you know, one small step for man.
One giant leap for mankind.
For mankind. I know the rest of it. Everybody knows it, right? To live through that era, to be able to see that, you know, not everybody has that. You know, we have new generations now that just have no clue, you know, what that was like and what we saw. What did you see? I've just given you my experience. Can you share with us your experience of the moon landing?
Well, when I heard those words, I asked myself, I wonder how long they thought about what words to say. I'm sure they had it planned. And it never occurred to me there was anything else going on when I first saw those words other than the regular landing. So when Bill told me that he was watching TV in a secret room, and that on the TV that there were craft on the crater at the same time that Neil Armstrong was, or close to when Neil Armstrong was saying these words, I was stunned. And the reason I was so excited is because Bill had drawn a sketch of what was on the TV, and that sketch is in the book.
It is.
Yeah. It's a totally different story. It confirms what I have increasingly believed, namely the process of controlling the secrets is so sophisticated that the government is able to fool the entire public that nothing anomalous was seen there, and the anomalies being 7 craft on the crater.
Tell us about this room, Bill. How many people were there, and what did they see?
Well, it was, I got sort of hired at TRW to put together like a little command control station for the Apollo program, where the facility actually set up straight contacts with mission control in Texas, so that we got the same information going and coming and listening to the astronauts' comments. And it was in not a large room. It was off-site, not on the regular facility at TRW. And we set this up so that we could monitor those missions as the company, which is putting together all kinds of proposals on space systems and then do unsolicited bids back to the government.
Where off-site was it? Where off-site was it? That's the first I'd ever heard of that.
Me too.
It was only about 6 miles because actually TRW had hundreds of off-site facilities, and it's just one of those, like in a separate building, only 6 blocks from the facility, and we had all of the communications that NASA had, and we were connected to them. So we could contact them if it became necessary, but we were just monitoring. That's all we were doing.
This is a different mental image from what I read in the book. I was under the impression this was like at mission control, you know, the tiered, you know, control center there, with the 100 people or whoever was controlling the entire mission. But this, you're telling me this was separate from.
Yeah, this is a separate thing. Mission control was down at in Texas, and it should have been in the Los Angeles airport because that's where all of the space people were. But
Humans.
after Kennedy got taken out, why a certain governor moved everything to Texas. But we had the capabilities of listening to the conversations and viewing what was taking place, even with some of the cameras. Like, for instance, after in the maneuver to get from launch position to the moon, we had to separate stages. Like, we had to separate the LEM stage from the S4B, turn them around backwards and connect them again. There's all kinds of very complicated maneuvers that we were doing while we were flying there, okay?
I remember that. I remember all that, yeah.
And so remember also that we had launched some 12, 14 surveying missions where we sent up satellites that flew around the moon so we could be looking at where we were going to land, make the selection of where we wanted to land, and we had seen facilities, ancient facilities on the moon. We already knew this.
What year was this?
This was, I guess, the last year before the actual launch.
Okay, so who are we? Is it who are we? Is it NASA or is it
I'm speaking of NASA. We NASA, and so these. Before the first man went to the moon, you don't just go there cold. What you do, it was the program to go, and several different vehicles were sent up to photograph different areas, even to confirm the location that they wanted to land. Was there any problems around that? So these vehicles go out, the cameras get turned on, they make their missions around the moon, and they take their photographs as they're going around. So, and those are programmed from NASA facilities here. That's not the one that we had at TRW. But that was already programmed, so we, supporting NASA, we, TRW, saw some of the photographs of the previous non-manned missions, which showed buildings, ancient buildings. We also saw translucent buildings which were parked like a building could be 3/4 of a mile high, glass, and be 1.5 miles above the surface of the moon.
So Bill, this was over a period of months or just in the vicinity of the Neil Armstrong landing?
It was like these appeared over the year before the first launch, man-launched vehicle. Okay, so we found all kinds of, NASA found all kinds of new things, which of course they didn't release.
Was TRW getting this at the same time as well? Were they aware of
No,
this?
but before that, we were getting the same information from our people in NASA, okay? So we're like in bed with the NASA missions. We're making recommendations and program. We have a contract.
So TRW had access to the medical communications.
Yeah, and we had access to most everything on the program,
Okay.
communications-wise, everything. But this separate little building thing was sort of different in that this gave us, at our facility here in Los Angeles, sort of a window to what Houston was looking at, okay? We got sort of this stuff. And maybe not legally, but we were doing this. Okay, anyway.
Well, Bill, did you see some of these buildings also on the TV? Did your eyes personally see these?
Yeah, we saw some of the structures.
But did you see it?
But wait a minute, yeah, but we saw those
He keeps
down
saying
at
we.
the, wait a minute, that was down at the NASA facilities before the first manned mission.
Okay.
Yeah, so you've mentioned that. So because they had to do the
Yeah.
reconnaissance, but did you personally yourself lay eyeballs on a building a mile and a half above or on the surface of the moon?
One of the ones that I saw was a glass building that was floating like a mile above the surface.
You saw that one.
Yeah.
Was it lit up? Was it broken? Was it?
It looked like a translucent building, not clear. The pictures weren't clear. That same series of photographs that they had, that NASA had, showed 3 different areas on the other side of the moon which had ancient structures on the surface of the moon. And we saw those before any manned mission.
It's exciting new stuff to me.
It is, as it is for me. I'm agape. I can't, I'm just like,
Okay,
wow. Well, so, hang on. So here's a question for you, Bob. And please, we're going to come back to that in a second. At what point does a building stop becoming a building and become a spacecraft? It's a mile and a half above the surface. And
okay, what we were looking at, and this is down at Huntsville, because most of the studies, the data went immediately there. They didn't decipher the data in the command center in Houston. Everything went to Von Braun's, Dr. Debus's facility.
what's on your mind? What are you thinking?
What's on my mind? NASA never said anything except that Houston was in total command of all these missions. And they never admitted that the Huntsville had anything to do with this level of activity. I mean, Huntsville basically was initially kind of an Army program. Yeah. And, but clearly, Bill is saying is that Von Braun and Debus were able to get access to the top secret NASA stuff on the side without a lot of people knowing about it.
Because they were running it.
Yeah, yeah.
Bill, I think I'm reflecting on my insistent question about this mile and a half thing. I may have misinterpreted what you said. You said a mile and a half above the surface. Does that mean it's floating above the surface, or is that the structure's a mile and a half high?
The structure is a mile and a half high, and it's stationed there. Okay, it has a permanent station position.
Floating.
Floating. So it's not
Floating.
attached to the moon. It's still. So
No, it's got nothing. It's not attached to the moon. It's just one, and it's a rectangle, like a rectangle building.
like a skyscraper. Or
Big
whatever is your
square,
standard,
yeah.
Long, rectangular.
First I've heard of that.
It almost looked like ice that you put in your drinks.
So is the altitude that this structure is floating above the moon a mile and a half above the moon's surface?
Yeah, above the moon's surface.
Okay, and how big? And so the structure, it's hard. It'd be difficult to kind of gauge the size.
It could be like a 200-foot, 200-story building, floating, big rectangular building floating.
Back to my question about when does a building become a ship?
There were other facilities. There were other facilities that were like streets or roads on the surface as that they photographed. So all this stuff was new. All of it was classified, of course. So you knew a little bit about your mission of where you're going to go before you went there, okay? That was the purpose of it, but they found all this stuff. So the actual mission, the first one, when the astronauts got there, before they got there, halfway, it wasn't broadcasted back to the public's information of the mission, but NASA got it, and that was that there were a number of vehicles, huge vehicles, who were closing in on our Apollo vehicle, which now is only the S4B stage, and the because Boeing's first stage booster is gone, North American's second stage booster is gone. Now we've got the S4B stage and the LEM, okay? So we're a very small vehicle, and this massive extraterrestrial vehicle is coming at us, and our transmitting antennas that look at this system, that are watching this, can see this coming in. So this great big vehicle looks like it's going to hit us. It didn't, and it had no intention. Simply came in, moved around us, and finished its orbit. Then those guys eventually landed on the high edge of the craters, like the steep part of the outside edges of the round craters. They didn't land, they parked above it and they hovered.
They were hovering, just like it shows in your drawing.
Yeah,
Now, these ships had closed on the rocket and passed them, landed down there, and waited for them to land? Are these the same ships that they saw?
well, actually they came in, obviously not to damage us, our direction, but saying hello or whatever, okay, or giving us, no, that came later.
I have a question, Bill. Do you have any knowledge as to whether the astronauts were shown this previous information about what was on the backside of the moon or not? Were they kept in the dark?
That's a great question.
The personnel that were on the mission were knowledgeable of what was there, okay? So all of the astronauts did not know, but the astronauts that were making the mission were told ahead of time they were to look for that as they made their orbit around the moon to
okay.
set up
Okay.
the landing mission.
Okay, thank you. High clarity.
But I'm just saying that if you hear the conversations between Mission Control and the Apollo, they're talking about seeing as they orbit around the moon before the landing, okay, because you don't just come and land, you orbit. They're talking back and forth at different facilities as they're flying around the other side, which then confirmed the mission that their unmanned satellites missions went up there and photographed. The unmanned ones that were photographed before the first manned mission. So yeah, that stuff was confirmed, and it went back and forth in the conversations. And even to the point that one of them wasn't there, it was further over to the southwest part of so-and-so. So those kind of conversations were going back, none of which the public heard, and even none of which some of Houston heard, okay? What got back to the command center, missions control in Houston was broken and split too. Not everybody there heard everything. Not just they covered it up, Other people covered it up for normal public, but
Right,
it was,
sanitized,
it was even covered to individuals.
Bill, because this communication system was part of your responsibility, that meant that you probably went to this remote building more than just once, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. But what I'm saying is, you didn't just see a large group of tremendously large military-like vehicles parked around the side. One of these came by and another one came by when they're still going into orbit, before they even got into orbit. And
Right, so yeah.
maybe they saluted, maybe they didn't. Maybe the admiral snapped his heels together and saluted. I don't know, but he had what was a friendly.
Was it a
Pass.
friendly? Yeah, friendly pass. Do we know who they are? I mean, who are these?
So I'm just saying, before what's in the book, where it says, I say that this is what happened actually as the astronauts climb down out of the little structure. They look up and they see this. They saw it before. Mm-hmm. They already saw it before. But in the book, you try to write a story, and but
No, go
you
ahead. Sorry.
don't have that part in it.
During our break, I had done some research this last week on Apollo landing, and I came across a testimony by Linda Moulton Howe, who knows an astronaut, or at least a friend of Neil Armstrong. Mm-hmm. And this person, firsthand testimony, who knew Neil, heard Neil say while he was visiting his house, words to the effect of, they made me turn the limb because there were three of them down there, or something like that. I've got it here in my notes, but basically acknowledging that Neil had said something, and when he was saying it, he said it under his breath as he was looking down, staring at the floor. So was the testimony that Linda had received. Now here you are, telling us these ships are flying by, saluting, landing, and you see the feed on the Earth.
Well, NASA saw that. Come on, NASA saw it. Okay.
But we didn't. Bob, you and I. We didn't get to see it.
No, that's right.
That's my whole point.
But so the other thing that come out of this is that we had other missions. We had 8 other missions to go up there and do all kinds of stuff. So you had to go down there and land first, do your first thing, and then try to adjust those other missions that you have planned that would respond properly to what we found.
well, I'd like to offer a sort of global thought here. I think what Bill believes, I think, is very important for us to listen to. But what Bill saw and what he heard is unique, because that's, in fact, firsthand witness testimony. And so, Bill, some of the things that are so interesting here is that you're reporting on what you saw on the screen. That's quite unique, and that's why I think it's so highly relevant. And what you heard and what you saw when you were when you were exposed to the interviews with these Navy operatives in 1942 to 45, that to me is also unique, because you're the only person alive who knew what was said in that room that resulted in what we learned about what was going on in Nazi Germany in those 4 years.
Yeah, well,
So-
other people that were in those meetings heard it.
They're dead, though.
Yeah. Oh,
I think.
okay.
So you have, I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, when we talk about any kind of investigation, be it legal or otherwise, or history, for example, you always want to have a first-hand account, and then you can impeach at the end of days, this guy's character, his insanity, whatever, then you weigh it, is this, how much weight do we give this in our own accepted truth and reality? What are we searching for? What do we get? Here we have Bill sharing with us a version of history that None of us have heard. We didn't see it on TV. But TV's not the end-all and do-all. I'm going to wrap up with one thing, and if you hold that thought for a second, it's about proof. First-hand testimony. I'm interested in what Bill has experienced and seen. I'm interested in what you've experienced and seen. But there's other sources of information as well that we all receive, and it's through media. You know, we're getting it on the internet. It's not ours. It's somebody else's. You know, so how do we discern? You know, we go back to, is this something you know or something you heard from somebody else? And I'll leave it at that. Bill?
So what takes place then is they don't have a problem with the landing, which they had anticipated they would have. They climb down. They first thing they do is take the Freemason plaque and they put it over next to the structure so you can see both of them, and they photograph that as the Freemasons then accepting the ownership of the moon. Mm-hmm. Okay, I don't know whether we understood that part.
No, I got it, but go ahead.
And so then, all this before you do your real thing. They dig down in the box where all the stuff is, and they bring out the Freemason flag. And they stick it in here like this, and they stand next to the Freemason flag. Okay? First things first here.
So you've seen these photos?
Yeah. And I'm only saying, what have the Freemasons got to do with this?
Well, we've seen the photos of was it Buzz Aldrin with his ring and his bib, you know, on the limb, you know. So you know, this is not.
It's not totally new.
Yeah, so we've heard this before, but you're seeing this being done. Is that what you're saying, that you saw them through the video feed, them conducting this little ceremony on the on before one small step for man, it's one planting of a flag for the Freemasons, and then we'll do the one small step. What came first? You know, what happened?
Yeah, I mean, you got to ask, what are Freemasons? What are they doing here? Every one of the astronauts were Freemasons. Wow.
No, I'm taking it literally, Bill. I mean, the first things first. I mean, am I getting that right? Is it fair for us? I mean, are you telling us that
before you accepted that you were there, United States, accepting that you owned the moon, which you don't own it, it's not yours.
Well, Walter's asking a very specific question. What the timing was the Freemason ceremony before, after the small step for mankind?
No, it was before. The first thing that was done was the
now, did they do
the
that
two things.
in the craft or on the moon?
On the surface of the moon.
It just keeps getting worse, better. I don't know. It's just.
No, wait a minute. You put the plaque on the dirt, on
Okay,
the soil.
you said next to the structure, so that would.
And then you take all the pictures with them standing by the plaque, okay? Then you separately one of the guys brings the flag down, you stand that up, and then the guys stand by the...
And they climb back up the ladder into the thing, and they do the Neil Armstrong show.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard this?
Never heard it. Brand new.
Welcome to Search for Truth Reality, my friends. This is just an amazing...
Well, you've read about Freemason rings. You've seen them inside the limb, okay? But what I'm saying is this part about, obviously, it was determined that when Neil Armstrong said, "Good God, sir, they are enormous," referring to these massive extraterrestrial craft, okay? They weren't crafts, they were ships. They were not crafts, they were ships. And so for them to be parked around the edge of the crater, above the surface, floating, okay? And then many of the reptilians standing with their legs apart, standing
all right.
on the ground.
They're on the surface. The reptilians are on the surface of the moon. That's what you're telling me.
Yeah. They're standing underneath the ships.
And you saw this.
Yeah, and
Were they scaly? Did they have
then
suits
the word
on? Or they?
then the word came back. They're giving us the finger.
God.
Well, they were pretty far away for you to tell what they really looked like, weren't they?
Yeah, it's a long ways. It's hard to do it. But whether that was actually happening, the finger thing or not,
yeah.
but that's what the statement they made.
Right.
Okay, so now we have to trust somebody else's word. An astronaut who's a 33-degree Mason who's.
Yeah. So they're giving us the finger, right?
But nobody even knows that the astronauts are Freemasons. Nobody knows this. That's,
All of them? All of the ones that went to the moon,
yeah, all the ones that went to the moon were.
but not necessarily all astronauts
No,
today.
but I'm talking about the Apollo program.
Well, we know at least Buzz is. We've seen photos of him, and the assumption would be, well, are the others? I've not seen anybody beyond Buzz Aldrin outed as 33-degree Mason.
I don't know, but I know an astronaut socially, he comes to a local MUFON meeting. Next time I'll ask him, are you a Freemason?
Oh yeah, show me your ring. Go ahead. Let's see. Just go. Show me the ring. That's how you ask him. Where's the ring? I want to see it.
Yeah. So there really wasn't much more to say because essentially time was of the essence. They had a lot of things they had to do,
Yeah.
a lot of early testing, even though a lot of the testing part came with other missions. They tried to get as much as they could. And, but there was obviously other people there. It wasn't that they flew in and nobody else was on the moon. The reptilians were on the moon.
Well, it seems a little backwards though. So let's say they know. They know there's reptilians or whatever. There's beings up there. They know there's craft up there. They know there's structures up there. They gotta know that there's life up there too. And yet they go through this ceremony. They put this plaque out and the flag, and they claim it for themselves. Really? Yeah. Whose moon is it? You think it's yours? Yeah. Those are your words.
No, really, it's not your moon.
No, it's not your moon.
And not even your planet. We're just a laboratory for the rest of them.
Okay.
The thing about people on the moon that interests me exceptionally much is the idea that the first recent Homo sapien on the moon was a German Navy captain. And according to Michael Sala's book,
Yeah.
that was the case. I forget his name right now, but it was what, in 1942 or so?
yeah.
Something like that. He set foot on the moon and began a small Navy base up there,
Yeah.
German Navy.
Yeah.
So then by the time the war was over, there was a group of what, 20 or so Nazis who were up there?
That were already up there, yeah.
Yeah, right. So they had already made their deal with the reptilians
Yeah.
that were giving us the finger
Yeah.
years later,
But all that was done before.
25 years later.
Yeah.
So the thing that excites me so much is, as I said earlier, the idea that the Germans were way ahead of us and even on the moon before the end of the war is something that if we can convince the public that that's true, then I think it's a lot easier to convince them all the rest of this almost unbelievable stuff. But just take that first step.
Yeah.
And the first step is so important to me is because it depended on what Bill personally overheard these Navy operatives say over a period of 3 years
Yeah.
in the presence of Admiral Rico Botta, and the process whereby multiple times these fellows testified and what they saw, and then you helped them create the final reports and delivered them.
Yeah.
And even the Admiral said, this is unbelievable sometimes, right?
Yes, it really did. And Michael Salas did a study through Freedom of Information, getting some recent study on Admiral Ricobata. And the study stated that before Ricobata took his position as Commander Naval Air Station San Diego, he visited 4 aircraft companies, 4 of them. he talked to the top people in those 4 companies, Lockheed, North American, Douglas, whatever. And then 4 weeks later, Billy Tompkins lands there and he's got this package for these guys, okay? And that document also confirmed that Tompkins represented a 4-star admiral in his presentations.
How old were you? How old were you at this time?
18.
18 years old.
And that's not in the book, but Mike LaSalle got this just recently, within the last 3 or 4 months, in Freedom of Information. A whole lot more about the admiral.
Intelligence background of Rico Mata.
Right.
Yeah, and it confirmed that yes, he did visit 4 aircraft companies before the first package was delivered. And that Tompkins represented the 4-star admiral as the person disseminating the data. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Whenever you get any kind of validation or confirmation, really corroborating data behind your testimony, that's always.
Well, I know,
very,
Bill.
very
Yeah, I know, Bill, that some of these many meetings with the Navy operatives must run together in your mind. But is there any one thing that they said that was the most amazing to you that was going on in Germany that you almost could hardly believe?
Okay, so we're stepping away. We're stepping away from the Apollo, and we're going to jump into World War II. Yes, and the early life of the tender Billy Tompkins and his missions. So please continue.
Actually, I can truthfully say I can't pick out one that was so much more of a unbelievable situation, because literally everything that they were bringing, you have to think of it this way. The SS were given bright, shiny, brand new UFOs, okay?
That would have been
It was
exciting.
totally different than us.
Yeah.
We get,
Are you sure?
no, and so here it is, play with it. We'll
Yeah.
teach you how to drive it,
Right.
okay? So the SS was so much advanced of us that bringing these packages back and disseminating them around the country, they're just packages of sketches, of some drawings, of a couple of paragraphs, and on a subject of communications or propulsions or something, and given to the different companies to make one of those. So you didn't, good God, they were,
So the packages that you were delivering to the companies, typically we would now call RFPs, or request for proposals,
yeah,
in effect.
yeah. But I mean, a request for proposal is a big, long stack of contract data, okay? We didn't have that.
They're handing out Post-it notes. Here's a stick drawing. Can you make this?
Yeah, Bob, you're giving it to me, and I'm over here at Northrop.
Yeah.
But you didn't give me a request for proposal. You gave me, the data you gave me is of not even in the German language. Some of it is hieroglyphics.
So basically, you're saying that there was a little ambiguity as to what was being delivered and what was the intent, but basically we're just telling our aircraft companies that it looks like this is what the Germans have, and think about whether we could replicate it, but they didn't really ask the question.
Well, they didn't. They also asked all kinds of questions that I didn't have answers for. But the point was, we wanted them to study that
Right.
and see if there would be any way that we could understand it, and then
Right.
try to see if something could be designed, like a communication system that would do that.
Right.
You know what? This is like decades before you picked up your first UFO book.
Right. Yeah.
But it was it was a very difficult thing to do. I finally got to a standard set of things I would say to, because I did it so many times.
The
I
standard
got
thing
it
is
done.
like what you just said, right?
Yeah, I'd get a dialogue,
Yeah.
and I would use the same dialogue. We know, and take a look at this, and then there's this part here, and I would go into, I'd answer the questions, because remember, if Bob's doing it and I'm Northrop, Bob is asking me to take this, some guy's sketches, some drawings, some photographs, and a couple of documents that are not even in English or German. They're in a hieroglyphics.
But typically
they're in Egyptian hieroglyphics.
Now, were they Egyptian for sure, or were they?
Well, you don't know. You don't. They were that type. That type.
All right, because now if they were Egyptian, that'd be cool. But the point is, there's some kind of glyphs, some kind of things that doesn't represent any kind of written language that we.
What's one of those? What's one of those? You know?
Yeah. What is that? Meanwhile, in Germany, here you go.
Yeah.
So I visualize these conversations you're having. Typically, when you deliver this package, was it to one person or to 2 or 3?
Usually be 4 or 5 people.
4 or 5 people. And was one of them usually pretty high ranking?
Yeah, always.
Always like the president of the company, maybe, or most high up?
I think of the laboratories, the director of the lab, to like Warminster, Pennsylvania, Naval Development Center, Warminster.
That was a Navy facility, though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was an admiral that ran it,
Yeah.
and he would always be there at every one of the meetings.
So when you went to the Navy facilities, you usually got the guy in charge.
Yeah.
When you went to the company facilities at Lockheed, you were never quite sure who you got.
I didn't know because a telephone call had been made, a document had been submitted, and to the 4 aircraft companies that Admiral Riccobotta went to before he even accepted the mission being Commander of Naval Air Station San Diego. That's how far back this thing went.
Right. But these 4 or 5 guys get this package, they understand it, and they sort of understand it. They understand what it represents. They don't know what to do with it, but they know there's potentially a huge amount of money to be had to basically make one. So they're going to have to have a story to present to the boss.
Yeah.
And they probably aren't able to create this story right away because they don't know how it works technically. They have to be able to tell whoever is running Lockheed or Douglas that, hey, if we create a proposal to reverse engineer this, it would look like this. But they got to write the proposal.
Yeah. So this is he's describing really, how hard it is on the company to accept this small package. I guess that's the reason they didn't call them proposals; they called them packages.
Now, one other thing. So it was, as I understand it, was more than just these companies. There are also universities involved as well.
And Navy facilities, all 3.
And with Caltech, it wasn't Caltech in Pasadena. My first one was at Caltech in a brand new temporary building at the Navy facility out in the desert. And Caltech was working on other programs, nothing to do with extraterrestrial.
And the likely guy to be there would be somebody like von Karman, who I think was working there.
Exactly, that time.
And he's the guy who shows up later as having special knowledge about this subject.
Help me and my viewers out with von Karman. Who is von Karman?
Theodore von Karman, he's is recognized as a brilliant aerodynamicist and physicist, responsible for a number of breakthroughs in that field.
Okay, so he'd be one of these guys at the universities.
Yeah, he was a Caltech guy. And I think he was the one who maybe even set up, he was the one who maybe set up the Caltech facility outside of the university aspect of it.
And JPL was right just like this.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
JPL.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But it just, these weren't like, take a look at this, see what you can come up with. It wasn't that at all. I mean,
Well, they were expecting something, some kind of product to come out of the back end of this.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like we're going to throw money at the wall and see you later. Go research and have fun.
Well, he didn't deliver money, he just delivered documents.
yeah, no.
Well, each company would have to come up with whatever funding to do that and just determine whether to. There's a whole business.
But if it's
Sides to consider as
even
well.
if it's an unsolicited bid from the other side,
Yeah.
that didn't fit this situation at all.
But imagine how hard it would be to get the presidents to actually pay attention to this,
Yeah.
unless they'd have been involved in the initial
Now, Bob,
meeting.
Right.
Bob's right there. I mean, you have to understand the feel at that time. I mean, it's insane, okay?
Yeah, like I said, chicken scratch on a Post-it note. Here, go make a flying saucer.
Right, right.
Really? I'm going to spend $1 billion on this. Come back when you got some more information would be my tendency. It's just fascinating to think where we are today. Do we really have a secret space program? Have we mastered anti-gravity? Are we actually out on all the planets in our solar system and the 12 closest stars, which I think was the other part of the Apollo program, using these the Nova trucks, these huge rockets to take machines into the sky.
My gut feeling is yes to all those questions.
And so it's all been done.
Yeah, it's all been done.
And here we are talking about where is it? And when Bill comes along and tells you, oh yeah, I saw that back, and yeah, I saw it. It's like, dude, man, where you been? I saw it. I want to. We're running short on storage space on our disk. We got a few more minutes. What I like to do is ask this question. There was something that was left out of your book, Selected by Extraterrestrials. And the other part of this, I love this title, My Life in the Top Secret World of UFOs, Think Tanks, and Nordic Secretaries. The question was, and you told me about this last time we visited, because you pointed this out, that you forgot to include this in the book, and it was a question that I had, and I'm sure a lot of the readers out there had about the book, is how did you learn that your secretaries were indeed Nordic extraterrestrials?
Okay, you have to go back to the chapter of how I got her, because there were three other people that came in first. And there's, in that chapter, they were nice young ladies. They were smart. Some of them actually really did work good. But then 5 or 6 weeks after we got them, they disappear. Or they get told that they were being transferred to the El Segundo plant. And then my attorney does the investigation and finds out that she didn't even report there, and she doesn't live in her apartment. So what's this all about?
This was after you were at Douglas? After you were at Douglas, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and actually, on the Apollo program, I had an attorney, and no other section chiefs had attorneys. Well, that was supposedly to keep me out of trouble, because I was in trouble a lot, okay? But that was really because what we were doing had so many things in it that writing a document and isolating it so nobody else could build it requires legal process. And so that's what he really was. He put together these packages that came up in the development of the programs, where we would have essentially new businesses for the company. And so patents got involved. And it got so big that the Navy formed a patent office in San Francisco. We worked directly with them. And it was a Navy patent office. Some of the stuff was coming from extraterrestrial. Some of it we were designing. It's amazing. And no other engineering department in aerospace even approached that because they never had the need.
So we've got a few minutes left here on our time on the disc here. So if you can tell us how you came to actually learn, tell us the day you learned that your secretaries were Nordics.
Okay, sorry to deviate from that. On one flight, about 6 weeks after I finally got my real secretary, and she reported for work, again, flying in another DC-7 to Cape Canaveral with my assistant this time, assistant section chief. He told me, he said, Bill, we could be in trouble. This is on the aircraft. And I said, what? We're in trouble all the time. No, he said, is it wise for us to leave her there because she could sell the whole company to our competition, Lockheed or Boeing? I mean, that woman is unbelievable. You can't leave her alone. She can do anything.
He was worried you left the secretaries behind.
Yeah. And so this goes on, and at that time, neither one of us believes that she's a Nordic. We don't believe that good-looking one over in propulsion is a Nordic. And even the guy that comes every once in a while, their advisor,
Right.
They're not Nordics. We don't believe that. Actually, it was over a year before we really accepted, because of conditions that came up, holy cats, they really are Nordics. Wow. And everything after that completely changed. That's when she simply opened up and started telepathically putting stuff in my head like so fast I couldn't even keep up with it. Answering the problems, coming up with major problems, answers to them. Now, she didn't answer all the problems, but I would say she answered over 50% of all of the major problems of Apollo. The other stuff I sort of came up with sideways about the answer to the others.
Sure. I mean, so you can't really credit them for providing all the solutions to Apollo. We discussed that in the car on the drive up. So can you tell us about what happened in the staircase?
At what?
In the staircase.
At the staircase?
Yeah.
Okay. Our building in engineering was nothing but a wooden hangar. My section was in the second floor of that hangar. It was a big high curved roof, all made out of wood. So there's splinters around because they didn't take time to clean up everything because we had to get in there real fast. So the stairway going down had splinters in it, and they hadn't cleaned those off. So my secretary is going down the stairs to get the blueprint copies made. And she gets halfway down and she catches her little high-heeled shoes on one of the splinters, and she falls the rest of the way down to the bottom, and she goes unconscious. And so two guys come running over. They sort of hold her and pick her up, and they were going to, the other people came around to help, and they were trying to pat her on the head and see if they could make her wake up. And so it ends up that she doesn't react quickly, so they figure she may be really hurt, and they decided to, well, they called the dispensary to see if they get the doctors to come over, and then they tried to come up with a method to carry her over there. So while this is taking place, she's talking to, no, other people are asking her questions, and she's coming back with stupid answers. And so her boss then said, told her to wake up because she could be hurt and sit up and everything. So she said, who are you? My boss is Bill Tompkins. He's the head of Apollo. And says, no, I'm not. I'm your boss. I'm Captain so-and-so in the Nordic Navy. You're so-and-so. And he calls her by a different name, which is a real name. And he said, you're a lieutenant commander, and I'm your captain. Wake up. Back and forth all over. So finally she wakes up. And in the meantime, she said some of the wrong things. Fellows had picked her up, holding her by the bottom, and she's waking up and having a ball. So she turns out to wake up, and now she can remember everything. But that's the way that I saw and heard everything that happened to her, and I'm upstairs in my office on the second floor.
Oh.
I saw everything. I heard every conversation. This is the first time I know she's a lieutenant commander. She has a captain who's her boss. There's a contract to Douglas for she, the other girl, and the other guy to report to the admiral everything that goes on, the Nordic Navy admiral, and that mission was a mission to us to see that we accomplished the Apollo missions, all 4 of the Apollo missions.
All right, welcome back to Search for Truth Reality. We've had a nice lunch together. Thank you, Bob. It's great. We're going to continue our conversation, and I know that both of you would like to cover a couple of things. I want to start with Bill because there's some things that you definitely want to talk about. Life with the Admiral during the war.
Well, what I was alluding to is it was important to understand that the subject that's coming back from Germany by the operatives, they're bringing information back that is totally, almost unbelievable. Admiral Ricabata many times shook his head as the operative is trying to describe that particular portion of some of these programs. It was difficult to realize that there were thousands of situations that had been implemented into Germany by the extraterrestrials, totally changing their way of life, including extending some of the Germans' life, because the extended life program was already in operation in Germany way before it got started at TRW later on in many years.
Did it actually get started at TRW, or was that just a study?
It was a study that went into a program. The program involved the 4 largest advanced medical companies in the country. It has been a classified program. Scripps in La Jolla, California, is heavily involved in this program. And I've talked to a number of people there at Scripps who are currently still working on this program. And I think that it's nice if you sort of let me describe what happens to people that get on the program. And there's been over, I'd say at least 50 or 60 men in the past 20 years, and probably over 40 of women that have been involved in this extended life program. And it's all the way from a few weeks of extended life out to the highest is 43 years. And so the TRW initiated program, of course, when Northrop Grumman bought TRW, they got the extended life program too. So Northrop Grumman then got more involved themselves, even with considering that they now had an enormous laboratory, one space park, Redondo Beach, with the thrust to extend our life here. And so repeating a little bit, it takes 2 or 4 shots or 4 essentially aspirins over a 4-month period, one month at a time. And you immediately start to feel better. Different people were able to, their systems were able to accept the program faster than others. Many of the fellows were really slow in getting through it, and it took them a good 4 months to make the transition. But what happens is the men return back to 29. There's different years. Some of them been 32, some of them were even 26, but 29 was the number that they finally ended up with. You go back to 29. The young ladies have always gone back to 21. The big advantage here is that you have a minimum of 400% greater capability use of your brain. And of course, if we there go back to the present time, where we are still only using 2.3% of our brain, not because that's what we have chosen, but it's because the reptilians have been controlling our minds on this planet for thousands of years. Everybody asks the question, well, why is that? What does that have to do with extended life? What does that have to do with everything? Turns out that extended life allows you to physically be in the same capability that you were at that younger age. Not just live longer, but be able to have all of the muscles, all of your systems, all of your organs young. Everything about you then is only 29 years old. This then is, if you want to use a comparison, sort of an opposite direction of what some of the Solar Warden naval officers who have recently spoken publicly about returning from previous lives aboard Navy spacecraft carriers. They essentially reverse that operation, and their mind is then blocked to where they have no memory of the 20 years they spent in the Navy. Now, if they have gone ahead and developed a second phase of another 20 years in the Navy, they also had an option, I understand, to where they could start over or continue at the same age of the first 20 years. So this system has many different aspects to it. Its relationship to us in reversing our capability and increasing our technical capability is extremely important, because frankly, we don't have time in 75 years to even find out what's going on.
Which is your average lifespan of a human. So what you're saying is with the age regression, life extension, you become more capable, useful, able to contribute more because you grow up to a certain point, you become intelligent, you can increase that intelligence. There's one other effect of the life preservation that you've mentioned to me before that involves the capacity, the mental capacity. What is that?
Yeah, your mental capacity goes up 400% minimum. Some of it even to 700 and 800%. Okay, this is staggering because it was already in your brain, but you haven't been using that like Nordic people that live 2,400 years or whatever, and the blue people too. But not being able to live that long restricts the use of the brain that you do have, and for the reptilians to be controlling our brain capability, that's one thing. But to prevent us from living longer, I guess you have to ask the question, well, why would they do that? If they kept us running for a longer period of time, they could use us more. But there's kind of a side effect that's in this. And it gets into an area that Bob and I have discussed, and I guess you and I have discussed too, and probably be better not to get in that part.
Okay, very well. Fair enough. I just want to make it clear for our audience that aspirin is a billism for any pill or drug. It's not you're taking 4 aspirin, so don't go run out there taking your aspirin 1 a month because it's nothing's going to happen. The blue people, you've mentioned them just a moment ago. Now, is this something from your own experience or something that you've heard from others?
I have to discuss my part because yes, there's a great deal of data about them helping us now, but essentially, one of the groups of people that were assisting TRW, Nordic people, were the blue type. The level of assistance was primarily advisory, not by a person, but by the thoughts. So the information was coming to them similar to similar to the way that I got information from my Nordic secretary at Douglas, okay, on the Apollo program. Except she was there, but she could telepathically give me the information. I could be in Huntsville, Alabama, and she's in Santa Monica, and she could tell me what to do.
She's physically present. I mean, she's in this realm. She's in this 3D world. If I'm hearing you right, the blue
people were not physically here. They were here, their minds were here, but they weren't here in their bodies.
Were you the only one experiencing the interface with the blue people?
Did I what?
Or are you the only one that's interfacing or communicating?
No, there's thousands of people that have been interfacing with them.
Mm-hmm. But in the context of TRW and the research that's being done there, was there anybody else there at TRW who?
Yes, there's different programs that they were involved in. And they were then shown in a way that their thought levels were in the conference rooms in technical meetings. And they would make their suggestions telepathically. And say one of the people that was in the meeting that was not familiar with that correspondence or those people would end up saying, those are the blues that are talking over there, that's their recommendation. And yes, they fully understand our problems in the program. So essentially what you have is telepathic information being suggested not to 3 or 5 people in the meeting, but to all of the people in the meeting. So everybody hears the suggestion. Well, where did that come from?
Well, as though they're there. So what you're telling me is everybody in that room, for whatever the purpose is and whatever the project is, everyone is privy to the blue people communication through telepathic thought.
In that level of TRW, yes, and on those programs of TRW, totally unaware in most of engineering, okay? Separate program communication advisory.
How long ago did they start their communications with TRW? Do you have any idea?
Well, this was shortly after TRW formed, okay, which was 58, 59 time period. And most of the people in TRW were actually technical consultants to the think tank at Douglas before they got involved with TRW Space Systems. And Thompson, Ramo, and Woolrich were the three people that were working for Douglas on these programs. So they separated and formed their own company. But the company, unlike most think tank organizations, was able to essentially come up with a requirement. The monies would be unlimited to study that program, so they do a brief program study on it, and then if it appeared to be something that was plausible, funds would just be flowing out. We have never had a problem getting money to implement different programs or different systems, medical systems, space systems, commercial systems, because we even had, like at Douglas, we had commercial space systems in design and development at TRW too. So it was easy for us to get together, have different people come in, make the recommendations on the program, and then be part of a reviewing team to establish whether we're going to go full bore on that program, and then come up with an unsolicited bid back to whatever organization this would be orientated to. If it was an Air Force missile program, we'd go for that program. If it was a Navy space communication satellite program, we'd develop an unsolicited bid for that. And I think that doing that and having advisors, such as the Blue people, addressing what they were most interested in was commercial involvements, but they also assisted in the military. And so this was a major thrust inside of hundreds of different laboratories and subsystem labs who are boxed into different areas. So it's a program that the other laboratories are totally unaware of. And the top, of course, corporate, are aware of all of the programs. But different labs are totally, in fact, in some cases, there would be as many as 3 separate laboratories studying the same subject and addressing it in a different manner to find out previous to the trade-off studies. And I didn't get into trade-off studies before because they weren't done in engineering in most companies. Most companies would develop a new system and agree that that's the way it should be done. They freeze the design and they run with that development of that design. At TRW, it was always different. You went through that first phase. You came up with all of the background information, and you're convinced that's the best way to approach that program. Then you drop it. You come up with 2 different ways to initiate and discuss that program. They're called trade-off studies. Long before you ever got to an unsolicited bid back to any of your potential contractors or companies, you did the 2 studies. I don't want to change the subject, but sometimes in conversations between different people from different labs, maybe just at lunch, somebody would mention the blues. And maybe the rest of the people at that table had no idea what you were referring to. And because one fellow's referring it to his friend over here, it was the Blues that did so-and-so, or they said so-and-so, like this.
So you'd hear this in casual conversation. It's code speak, but only those on the inside are.
Yeah, because you normally don't talk about that, okay?
Yeah.
But that continually did come out, and most people never put the two things together to what this really was, because essentially you're being advised by extraterrestrials on a standard basis.
And really, it's relatively safe anyway, because the Blues could refer to anything, really, a bundle of wires, an assembly, a screwdriver, who knows, it could be anything, craftsman.
That's true, yeah. But Blues came along later, and that was something on a continuous base, okay, of, you gotta say, open extraterrestrial assistance.
Yeah. Did you know about the Blues before Bill just now mentioned it?
Never heard of the Blues.
Look, we just all kinds of revelations today here. Thank you for all these gifts, Bill. It's really.
Well, it's part of what we're doing, okay, and it's part of what we've been doing. There was, I'd like to go back, if we could, for a few minutes to Admiral Ricobata's efforts with his operatives in Germany.
Do you want to talk about your experience and then get into that insofar as what it's like living as a young sailor working for Admiral Ricobata?
Yeah. First of all, I won't get into it, but if any of you folks out there are interested at all in what Bob and I are saying, please pick up that book that we've got, which is Selected by Extraterrestrials, okay? And wait a minute, if you don't even buy it, just get on your computer and type in William Tompkins. You don't even have to say Tompkins, the aerospace engineer. All you have to do is just type in William Tompkins. You're going to get pages and pages and pages about this subject, okay? On the internet. Okay, but what was happening was that when I was 8 or 9 years old, I built a 6 different types of what I would assume a spaced rocket would be. I built the models, great big models. And one of the Navy commanders saw the models. He was a friend of my dad. And so he said, you ought to build ship models. That's a good model. You ought to build ship models. So anyway, I built some 45 Navy ship models, where an aircraft carrier is about this big, a destroyer is about this big, all the same scale.
These are all on display in
Yeah,
Carlos now.
and I'm just a kid, and so I look up stuff in the newspapers. I look and start collecting different types of magazine articles where they've got photographs of different ships. And then my dad takes us down, we were living in Hollywood. My dad takes us down to Long Beach, and the Navy has these enormous big powered open boats, powered boats that they use to transport personnel to and from the ships to the base, to the harbor. So we rode those out like on a Sunday afternoon. So we get to walk on the ships quite a bit. They hardly covered up too much, but you couldn't take a camera. So I'm interested in the latest version of, say, an aircraft carrier's secret equipment, where the 3-inch anti-aircraft guns are, where the big 5-inch automatic anti-aircraft guns are located on the ship. And I have to have my models just as most up-to-date as I can get them. And so then I need radar, and I need where I didn't know it at the time, but I walked the flight deck of one of the carriers. I think it was the Lexington, and very large ship. And they had steam catapults up on the bow where they used to catapult the aircraft off so they'd get a lot of them off real fast, whole squadron of them. And then they had arresting gears where you had a hook on the back of the airplane. You drop down on the final approach to the flight deck, and your hook that's dropped down catches on a cable, and that stops you. So you don't have to take a lot of the runway space. So, of course, those were all secret things. So I walk the deck, and I have a little pad, and I make a sketch of that, how big it is, where it's located, and this sort of thing. And then radar was a problem. But at that time, they had rectangular radars with some types of structure in between the big main support. So I walked the deck to where I can find the sun throwing a shadow onto the flight deck. So I walked that size of the shadow, and I mark that down. Then I go up to the bow and I walk the length of the steam catapult. And when I get home, I make perspective drawings of this and then 3 view drawings of these so that I can add these onto the ship.
This is all from, a lot of stuff's from memory as well, so it's from your memory and, as I understand it, and your drawings.
Yeah, and so then I make the drawings. And so publicity sort of got out on the ship models, and there was a couple of articles in the newspaper. But what was more important, they had the models located in the window of the Broadway department store on Hollywood Boulevard. And 2 naval officers saw that, and they went in and asked the people in the store who the fellow was and could you get a hold of him and this sort of thing. And there wasn't anything wrong with that. And then the next week, after they had been there, my dad is in his office over on Wilshire Boulevard, and 2 of these fellows come in, and they don't arrest him, they detain him, okay? But they detained him for 2 days and 2 nights.
This is your father.
My dad. And they want to know where he got that information, particularly with all of this secret stuff. And the fact that they had, as recently as 5 months before, relocated every anti-aircraft gun on the ship, okay? And before that, some of them didn't even have those guns on board, okay? This is before the war. So the next day, they let my dad out, and he took them over to our little 2-bedroom apartment house in Hollywood, and I shared a bedroom with my brother. And so they come in there to the bedroom, and I've got all these drawings and sketches and everything, and I've got all these newspaper articles and magazine articles and all this stuff. And it's piled halfway up to the windows on the side, all around the room. And they finally figure out this kid knows what he's doing, and he's doing something that's pretty accurate. Anyway, from that, I was called into, several months later, I was called into what would be a naval intelligence office in San Pedro, California. And they talked to me a lot. And so what I'm trying to get to here is, how did you get into the Navy, and how did you get to this position working for Admiral Ricabata? So my dad gets contacted again. He takes off work, drives me back down to that same base, and the same Navy commander was there that we talked to. And he inducts me into the Navy. And I'm in my first year of high school, about halfway through it. So because there was a real security problem about my family moving so many times, actually my dad didn't have money to pay the rent, so we'd move into a place for 2 months, he didn't pay the rent, and we'd get thrown out and go someplace else.
So this makes getting your security clearance a little problematic, trying to track all those places.
So when they found this out, to alleviate that, the time it was going to take it, they inducted me into the Navy, okay? And they put me to work at the Vultee Aircraft Company over in Downey, California. And they were developing a new Navy gull-wing, large Navy attack aircraft in a secret area in their facility.
Excuse me, you went to basic training before this or after?
After.
After.
So the other thing I want to kind of clarify is because I'm trying to think, how old was I when I was a sophomore in high school? 14, 15? I mean, you had to have been incredibly young. I mean, to be inducted in the Navy, be pulled out, they had to be breaking rules left and right to put you in.
Whatever it was, they did what they did. So they put me to work at this Vultee company, and supposedly it was just be for a couple of 3 weeks. Well, they did this. And so it turned out to be quite a bit longer because there were other problems with my dad, and I guess I never found out what that was till later, and that was his involvement with Freemasons. Anyway, I didn't know anything about Dad being a Freemason. So I got notification that I was to report back to Naval Intelligence in San Pedro, and they flew me down to San Diego. And instead of going in like normal recruits, I was driven right over to the facility for the Naval Training Station in San Diego, and I went in. And so I finished half of the normal training, and I got called for another order to skip that day. And they took me in a Navy boat across the bay from the Naval Training Station to North Island. And I'm in North Island now, and I end up in an office building in an engineering department where they convert aircraft from the old versions to new versions of the airplanes, big engineering department. And I'm introduced to, well, for 2 days I just sat in this office. And then I'm introduced to a Navy commander. He gave me some papers to study, and for another couple of weeks I don't know anything else either. I don't see anybody. I talked, when I first met him, he said, don't come in here without shining your shoes. And I had a dress uniform, but I just used sort of a sloppy seaman's work uniform in an office, okay? And I guess I didn't shine my shoes. So the third week, he calls me over, and he's got a lot of stuff for me to do. And he said, I'm out of here, it's yours. That's the only instruction I got from this commander.
I'm out of here, it's yours.
It's yours.
Allow me to summarize. 14, 15 years old, go in the Navy, you don't finish your training.
17, come on.
17, okay, I don't know how old are you in the 9th grade, 10th grade, 17? I mean, you're not even 18 in the Navy. They put you in training, they pull you out of training, they stick you in a building over here for, read this, shine your shoes, I'm out of here, it's yours.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
No, wait a minute, I'm a
17 years old.
Okay, wait a minute, I'm a third-class seaman, okay?
Even better.
With all these officers around, okay? And
Do you see how this doesn't make any sense?
no, it doesn't make sense, okay? So this nice young lady comes over to me, and it turns out that she's the engineering president This is very strange. It's a Navy facility.
Really?
North Island Naval Air Station is strange, but it's structured exactly like an aircraft company. So the title of the president of the company, or the engineers, or the engineer managers, or the drafting staff, or whatever, they all got commercial names, but they're all Navy officers, okay? And
Hang on a second.
so
Hang on a second. So, Bob,
I have a picture in the other room of him with the women that he was working with at that time.
okay.
oh, you have the picture?
I have the picture.
Oh, is this one we were talking about over lunch?
Yeah, that was one I was going to show you.
Can you get that?
Yeah.
Take a break here. Just say, keep rolling. We're good. We'll just keep rolling.
Actually, this one is worth. No, this one is worth seeing.
So, all right, while he's off doing that, basically, you know, I was ribbing Bill. It's like everywhere he goes, it's like it's all about the skirts. You know, he's always working with the ladies. You know, everywhere. You know, there's a foxy secretary or two or three, and every job you've had, it seems there are all these beautiful women.
And actually, they all were, okay, beautiful. They all were top level. They all were graduates, and they all were tremendously capable.
So you got all these people running around.
Every place I went, I had those.
Yeah.
Okay, don't ask me why.
I
I
won't.
can't answer that either.
I just find it just odd that, you know, here you are, third-class seaman, and officers going, it's all yours. That doesn't make any sense. These guys are running around in Navy, playing Navy, but really they're corporate on a Navy base.
We have to get this in your when we're talking, but
Yeah, we are talking.
But I'm just saying. I got flight skins, okay?
Yeah.
Which means I fly every month, okay? And this means that I am going to be trained not just as some guy to help out on an airplane. I'm going to end up being a pilot. And lo and behold, the Admiral has a high-wing, 7-passenger, big single-engine airplane that he flies all over. And I end up on board that airplane, flying all over western United States.
As a pilot?
With his pilot training me to be a pilot.
Okay.
And that, I got navigation, I got everything, and I never went to school one day, okay? And when I came out to get a regular pilot's license, I went through that because I didn't have to take all the tests I could automatically take, okay? But the point is that I was getting flight skins, so now I'm flying co-pilot on a Navy PB-4Y2 float airplane,
Oh, jeez.
okay?
Okay. Oh my God.
Now, with
Is this
that,
you? Is this really you?
that is little Billy Tompkins, come
No,
on.
Billy Tompkins is attractive.
Now, the
Gentlemen,
girl in the middle above my head, that's the one that I went with.
Okay.
She was my girlfriend.
All right.
And actually, she was one of the gals that helped me out.
This is actually a really cool picture. I like this. This is like something you might.
It's got the badges on. It says North Island, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah. ANR NASSD.
Yeah.
North Island. What's the SSD stand for?
Yeah.
What is SSD?
Now, this is a photograph of me working.
Oh, it says NASSD. What's the SSD?
Station San Diego.
Yes, I was. You know, my father and grandfather and uncles are all Navy. I don't know this. Pathetic. Just pathetic. All right. So you want to get? You want to go? Can you go tight on that?
We'll set it aside.
All right, we'll do a side later. All right, that's an awesome picture. That is really cool.
That is awesome.
Preserve
It really
that.
is.
That's very nice.
But anyway, so I didn't get the skins till later, but the commander that left had another fella, and his secretary came over and said, "We got to talk." And so I went into his office, and he sort of explained to me what I was going to be doing. And I don't know what the length of time was that the commander had been doing this job before I got there, but I know it must have been at least 1 year. So this is 1942, so that meant that Rick Abata was doing his thing in 41, okay? Which meant that Admiral Rick Abata had gone to 4 aircraft companies before he even got assigned to Commander Naval Air Station San Diego and discussed this subject, okay? So the 3rd week that I was there, the first operative come in. I have to say that's not correct. 2 operatives had come in and I didn't meet. I was not in the meeting. The 3rd week that I was there, I was invited into one of these meetings in that conference room up on top of the commander's
tower you mentioned.
tower, yeah.
Rock Island.
So the way it's set up is Admiral Rick, the big table. Admiral Rick Abata's here. I'm sitting next to him here. One of the Navy captains, of which I had 3 captain bosses and 4 altogether because Admiral Rick Abata was the 4th boss. So one of them would be there. The secretary would be on the end of the table to type, and the operative would be on the opposite side of the table. So this is all new to me. I get a little bit of information. We're supposed to try to listen to what's going on and make comments as required. So I never had any training for this, okay? And it took a little while to figure out what was going on. So the first guy that came in was one of the older Navy lieutenants in this spy group, which they never called them spies, but they're naval operatives. And they are like investigators in Germany and the occupied countries, attempting to find out what the SS is doing and what the situation is with extraterrestrials are doing things with the SS. None of this made any sense. So that was one of the few fellows that was there for a full week. Almost every one of the rest of them for 3.5 years, they were only there for the period of the 1 day, max 2 days, and they're back on the flight back.
Yeah, these are the operatives you're talking about. So
Operatives are gone.
in and out.
So we don't even have time to work with these operatives. It's just what he can give us now. And it had already been decided, I didn't do it, that they were going to put together packages and actually distribute them out to different technical organizations in the country on a classified basis. No document that I saw had secret stamped on it, not even confidential. We learned it later on. I learned it later on. That's the way they handled it. So after the operator had finished presenting his information, and after 1 or 2 of the captains finished all the questions to try to get better answers to what he's presenting, and the admiral does too, it was my job to stay with him for the rest of the day, the night, and the next day before he gets on another plane and goes back, okay? So I'm to be his buddy to help him whatever it is that he needs. If he needs whatever needs, I got to see that he gets this, okay? And by that same time, I'm to get as much additional information as I can from him of what he had presented. So I'm handed a document from the captain that's there and another note from the admirals over here. Questions. Okay, I get that the next morning. In fact, When I go in the next morning, that's the first thing I get. But going back to how this starts by day is that always after midnight, the admirals, I'm in my barracks asleep. The admiral's aide comes in the barracks, taps me on the shoulder and says one thing: he's here. Nothing else. I get dressed as fast as I can get dressed, and I still just look like your photograph of me.
Okay.
That's the way I look, okay? That's it. And I got my little badge. So I grab coffee on the way over. We get in there, the operative's sitting there already, and he's got stuff on the floor next to him. He's got stuff on the table. And then he's got his own notes, pretty well outlined. Some of these guys were real sharp. And he presents this information, if it's communications, something about communications, he has a box full of stuff. Whereas if it's about some sort of propulsion systems, very little. I mean, sketches, notes, this sort of thing, a couple of drawings,
Occasional photos?
occasional photos, and also there were the hieroglyphics, okay? And he made his notes on the hieroglyphics from talking to the other German guys as to what do you guys understand what that was? What did this one mean? Okay? And he would have a photograph of that particular bar or that structure, piece of metal.
So these operatives would get in a position where they can see the technology that's been worked on. It's got certain things, glyphs inscribed upon them. Whether they're Egyptian hieroglyphs or not, there's some kind of a glyph. It's something that we don't recognize.
Yeah.
And they've got some notes in there about, I assume, what this thing is. And,
Yeah.
But as far as decoding what these glyphs are, do the operatives have any clue? Do they even know?
So this, what I'm trying to say is, I had one buddy that was a commander, and he was really friendly with me, and he knew what I was doing. And so I kept asking him, you know, what in the hell, why do they do this? And I'm trying to get a better feel. We need a whole lot more information than that. How are we going to, and I always said me, because I never thought I was going to be the one that had to deliver it, okay? I said, how are you guys going to get this over to Lockheed? Or gosh, you said you're working with JPL and Caltech. You're working with them? How are you going to explain this? And I'm looking for a manual. Okay, give me a manual. And we don't even have a German manual on this. But this first one was really hard for me.
Yeah, so what you've described so far is really your first foray into this world, and you're expressing, it sounds like a little bit of frustration. This is my new job. There's pieces missing here. What am I supposed to do?
But surprisingly enough, I seemed to come on board faster than I thought I would. Okay, and I did get help from the captains. There was two of the captains that really helped me a lot. The other guy was around once in a while, never did help me. But it was that this is your job. You're not doing anything else except putting these packages together, and nothing was said about mailing the packages to the contractors.
It's all very unusual. I mean, that they would pick you, that you're so young, that you didn't finish training, that et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You fall into this position.
Yeah.
And now all this responsibility is kind of heaped onto your shoulders.
But wait a minute, I missed the most important thing. In Dr. Black's English lesson class at Hollywood High School. I can't spell, and I can't talk. So he takes me, puts me up in the front, and makes me do a dissertation, a presentation, and spell everything right. And I'm still spelling it wrong.
Yeah, this is before the Navy got a hold of you.
Yeah, I'm back in Hollywood High School before they took me. Okay, anyway, so I can't spell. Now this guy knows I can't spell.
Yeah, well, so do I. I've seen your writing, Bill. I know you can't
Okay,
spell.
all right. Anyway, so this goes on, and we then take this rough information. I get two of the girls that my girlfriend manages, and we start to put together a breakdown. We already had a breakdown that they had been using for these organizations, and we were able to put this together and get pretty good packages together, and then run copies of this. So we've got it, and at least one of the three Navy captains has filed every single one of these besides our regular files, okay? And nothing is classified, but we've all got it documented. And so then I have this photo lab. The Navy had a big photo lab there, and the old commander that left, he had this small personal used Photoshop. And you've seen the pictures of it, and you've seen the gals that run it, okay?
That one right over there.
Right over there.
So when Bill says Photoshop, it's not the Adobe program. It's a place that processes pictures, photographs.
Yeah, so, but we know not only photographs, but we run copies of all kinds of stuff that are possible related to this, that is part of the package, okay? That we then can say, I don't know whether this is that or not, but that's what he indicated.
Right. I think Bill or Bob, you wanted to make a point?
Yeah, I think, Bill, you've described in great clarity the process that you went through for these 29 people for those 2 or 3 years. And clearly their focus had been told to be the technology of the UFOs, largely, right? And my question is, did they ever talk about Antarctica? Going to Antarctica, submarines, big submarines, taking people to Antarctica, relationship to the any reptilians in Antarctica, or was that kind of out of scope?
The operatives knew about Antarctica. They knew about it.
They did, okay.
So yes, that information went to Ricabata.
Okay.
And that was part of some of the things that were being programmed, because one of the operatives, Bob, he was into a specific facility, and the facility was being packed up and being shipped to a different location.
Okay.
And one of the other operatives, at a different point, because we whenever we're discussing with the new operator, or one of the operators just came in, we always ask if do they know what Jim is doing, or have you seen Howard lately? Do you know what he's involved
But none of the operatives came from Antarctica, as far as you know.
No, but they said stuff is being shipped to the submarine base.
Okay.
And then another thing from a total different area, they have built massive truck submarines. The Germans had.
400 people, sort of thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's not just people, they would haul equipment too.
Did they ever talk about high energy weapons like lasers
Yes,
during the war?
yes.
During your debriefs, that when the operatives are coming through, they were talking about the high energy laser weapons?
Yeah.
See, that's consistent with the report that's in one of the recent books I've read of a 400-foot submarine apparently had to surface, and they were sighted by a British destroyer or cruiser, and they killed the destroyer with laser weapons. and this was like in the late 44 or so. And I just read that like 2 weeks ago as a report.
And it's not that just they were researching them. The SS was given brand shiny new ones, okay? So you didn't have to start from scratch from a bunch of pieces of paper like what I'm giving to these companies to go try to make something like that.
And they weren't the Nordics providing this either. It was another group of extraterrestrials that had given the SS complete, a multitude, just different, 14 different types, did you say? There was a number that you'd written, I don't recall, but
I think
it was more than one.
13.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 13 different types of hardware, flying, operable craft. Meanwhile, so we're here.
But I got the impression that on some of these, the Nazis mounted ordinary machine guns and weapons. But on others of them, apparently, they may have considered using laser weapons.
They did use the laser weapons on them, the bigger ones.
Okay. Were the laser weapons invented by the Germans or by the reptilians?
Reptilians.
Okay. See, that would be new information.
Yeah. The Germans, wait a minute, the Germans got real smart, okay? They were smart before this happened. Germans were very brilliant people, okay? Why they had to pick the SS to go do the thing that they were going to do, maybe they figured that what their missions are is not really very legal, okay? And it may be that that's the reason, but back to this information that comes in. You had other pieces of paper with different types of numerous numbering systems, okay, on it that weren't German. They weren't anything that we knew about. And so they would be identified by this numbering system. And of course, this was an extraterrestrial piece of paper, okay? And here it is. We're not going to tell you how it works. That's what we're asking you, Lockheed, to do. We're giving you a contract. You got to figure this out. So I'm getting this stuff from every place that I go with these documents. You know, you dumb a-hole or something, don't give us something like this. How do we do, what do we do with this?
Right, so they're calling you out because you've got really what amounts to what I mentioned earlier. It's like a post-it note with a stick figure. Here, go make a flying saucer.
It's not a request for a proposal. And so don't blame them for having a hard time trying to figure out what the hell does the Navy want us to do.
Right. I remember asking about the Germans because they were provided the technology, but in the form of the hardware, but there also some documentation, teaching, and even they had some challenges interpreting the written script or whatever was provided to them. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
So they also had, they couldn't read what was given to them on the written page. You know, and here here are operatives somehow getting access to at least some of that, I would assume, bringing it back and expecting our people to do create something based on a subset of something they have.
But remember though, actually they had reptilians there that looked like humans, okay? They had reptilian guys there that looked just like us that they could go ask to help us out here. We didn't have anything like that in the United States. We just had these frivolous packages with notes in them.
Do you think that any of the well-known Nazis that were photographed were actually reptilians?
I never thought that, but other people had said they thought some of them were.
Mm-hmm. Don't know yet.
I never thought it,
Okay.
but I don't know. But we're just trying to say, please, you've got to realize how hard this was on American organizations to take this information and run with it. And if you stop and think, what you just said was that somebody in the Navy gave Lockheed Aircraft Company one of these packages. And 4 years later, the Skunk Works gets started. And so isn't this upside down with what you thought? And so, yes, the programs were secret in every one of the companies, organizations, but information is leaking out. And eventually, the Skunk Works becomes reality. And it's sort of like a small think tank at Lockheed. But it starts from a package out of a two-star admiral's office at North Island. Wow. Yeah. It's interesting when you visualize this system that was going on and the complexities with which you're trying to help people do something when you don't give them the tools to do it.
Yeah, I'm sure others have asked you this question too. I mean, World War II, if the Nazis, the SS, whoever has been provided this, I mean, this is advanced technology based on what you're describing here. I mean, we couldn't hold a candle to any of that stuff. How did they lose the firing battle war, the bullets and all that? I mean, we went over there, we mowed over Europe, and we ferreted out all the Nazis, and yay, go America. America, right? NATO. We won over there. Did we win?
You didn't win the war. You did not win the war, okay? Even before the war started, a blonde young lady was contacted to put together a group of friends and be influenced by extraterrestrials to design and build a massive propulsion system in a large space transport.
Bob, did you have a thought you wanted to toss in there? You look like you had a...
No, I'm good. Okay.
And so
Well, yeah, so Maria Orsic...
yeah,
the Vril Society-
Maria was doing this, okay? And she was doing it, some of it in Antarctica, okay? And so the SS finds out about this and they confiscate all of the people and all the equipment and everything they're using and sort of make them slaves, but just for a very short period of time, less than 4 months. And then the SS gave it all back to them and said, you guys go ahead and work with the extraterrestrials you're working with. We're working with these extraterrestrials.
Doesn't that seem to run counter to whatever their agenda? Let's talk about the agenda. I mean, why would the reptilians give the SS all this technology? There's got to be some kind of agenda behind that. And if it's domination, whatever it is, why would they take it, especially advanced technology like that, and then give it back?
Okay.
Doesn't that run counter to the goal? I'm assuming the goal is they just want to take over the world or whatever.
Yeah. Well, all these ladies became the 1,442 people in that book right here, which is mentioned 5 or 6 times. So they felt that there would be possibly additional technical assistance to the young ladies and the men that are working this, okay? Her group, which may be beneficial to them, and we're going to let you develop your own. We've got all the assistance that we possibly could ever need to do this. So we took off, then the SS takes off on their own and goes past the young ladies and the other men that helped that organization.
But Walter's question was, if they had such technology, how come they let us win the war? And I guess the partial answer to that might be that they had their Hanabu 3, I think, in production, but I think they only were able to use it one night. Allegedly, they used it once and shot down a whole bunch of airplanes, but they didn't have enough to really defeat us in the air. That's point one. Point two is I think that they had kind of early on decided that they wanted to put their real strength down in Antarctica. So they shipped the majority of their UFO technology down there because their goal was really to go out into space, not necessarily just to beat the United States. But that's my speculation.
Yeah, and Bob is right with that. They go back to the missions, back to Hitler's mission with the extraterrestrials. First was Hitler wanted to take out all of the people he didn't like, the Jewish people. So you just take them out, whatever way. But secondly, you take every man, woman, and child on this planet and put them in these in-mountain production facilities all over Germany and the occupied country, building thousands and thousands and thousands of extraterrestrial vehicle, military space vehicle, and operate out in the galaxy with these, along with the reptilian naval battle groups, and do the same thing, enslave every planet they can find out there off of every star they can find.
But they never got thousands done before they lost the war.
Yeah.
What final word would you guys like to have before we close off this day?
Oh, but before Bob sits with his, let me try to say, the way, Bob's going to say it eloquently. I'm just going to rough something.
I'll roll.
Personally, wait a minute, no, personally, I want to see this information disseminated out across the planet, okay? I want the public to understand what has happened. I want that, that they have sufficient information to bypass this problem, I don't believe anything you're saying, and start to accept this reality of extraterrestrials, okay? And it's imperative to the people on this country to understand what their position is, and this needs to be fixed. And any help we can get from any extraterrestrials out there to counter some of these black hat people out there, this is great for us. We need to get everybody involved.
I've got a limited perspective at this point. I think there's two things that drive my thinking. One is the incredible sophistication that organizations, including governments, have had in keeping secrets. That's thought number one. And I believe that can be a convincing story, but it's a challenge because most people believe Washington can't keep secrets. And it's very difficult to get over that little hump. The second thing is I would say I'm not looking toward the aliens to solve our problems. I'm thinking that full disclosure will probably let the best results flop out. So I would say I'd go for full disclosure about everything, including disclosing things that would put a lot of people in jail because I think they deserve to be in jail. So those are my two main thoughts. And I think Bill's story really supports both of those arguments. Bill is himself trying to get the truth out. And I think the truth can set you free. Nothing wrong with that.
Indeed. Well, someday we'll have that, shall we?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's better sooner than later.
Better sooner than later.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching my YouTube channel, Search for Truth Reality. This is today with Dr. Robert Wood. Thank you. And William Tompkins, as always, thank you very much. And we'll see you all next time.